when I'm taking your presentation on, maybe you can introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Sarah Gunning, and I'm coming from Towson University, right outside Baltimore, Maryland. And today I'm going to be talking about service learning projects and the silos that students face when working with community partners and organizations. Okay, I got it. All right, so my framework is looking at a pedagogical perspective before students become technical communication professionals. I'm assuming that the silos exist rather than preventing them because I'm a realist and used to work in the technical communication profession, and I know that students have trouble accessing information as new writers or new employees, so I figured, how can I help them increase their access to this information while they're a student and we're in an area of open talk. So I'm looking at this from a background of service learning. Most of you are probably familiar with this. Students are paired with a community partner and they do real life writing projects for them. And I've done this a few times, but I've always noticed that I have one group of students go off pathway and kind of do their own thing, and they're not quite meeting their clients' needs. And I was curious about this. So conducting some literature review, I noticed that critical listening was a big component that has been missing in a lot of our curriculum. So in Kasman-Brooks' study, she's talking about areas where students struggle when working with partners, including overruled requests. So that's when students hear what the client is requesting but decide on their own a different solution. Unheard requests, which is where students may miss some of the things that clients are hoping to be integrated into the final design. And then last is the need for information or affirmation, which is an aspect of pseudo-transactionism where students are still writing for the teacher rather than for their client. So they're focusing on the grade rather than what the client has in mind. So I thought, what were some ways that we could address critical listening skills in service learning? So I wanted to help my students narrow the distance between themselves and others. And in case you aren't familiar with service learning, I provided a brief summary. It's a form of experiential learning where students engage in activities addressing community needs via structured opportunities. The main points of service learning is to provide experience working with clients, writing for the workplace instead of for an academic setting or for the teacher, and then socializing into the profession, learning what the expectations are for working as a professional writer. In relation to silos, students need to be able to access the information that they need from their partners in order to write a grant proposal or a document redesign or create a web page, which are typical service learning projects in my classes. They need to be able to work with information effectively and correctly, so they need to be able to ask the right questions to get the answers that they need to complete their design thinking. And then they also need to learn the professional skills involved in information retrieval. So what are some of those interpersonal skills? Asking questions, framing things in a way that your client's going to understand, helping connect the dots in between the writer's brains and the client's brains. So in regards to working with subject matter experts, which is SMEs up there, these are some of the skills that have been noted lacking in our pedagogy. Research methods, critical listening, debriefing, and focusing on process over product. So regarding research methods, Kelly Carlisle Cook talks a lot about interviewing skills and collecting the right type of data to make evidence in your claims. Something that's talked about a little less often are the soft/interpersonal skills that are used to gather the information from your client. We often talk about technical writing as putting things on the page, coming up with an end product, but we don't often talk a lot about the interpersonal skills that are involved. Critical listening, this is the regard to hear clearly, correctly, and in its entirety. So making sure that we're collecting all of the information that our client is providing, interpreting it correctly, and applying it to a way that's going to solve their problem. Debriefing. Reflection is critical for service learning. Students need to think about the processes that they've gone through, what's worked well, what could have been improved. Ideally hearing other students' experiences and how they handled their client situations. And then last, focusing on process over product. Much of the literature reviews discusses that students are still focused on the endpoint grade that you get at the end of the semester rather than the process leading up to production of that document. So I think that from a pedagogical standpoint, if we focus on those intangible aspects of writing, developing, interviewing questions, figuring out the best way to ask questions. Would it be over email? Would it be over phone? Those sorts of things, to avoid focusing on the end grade rather than the soft skills learned. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about 3 different service learning situations. I've kind of just been chipping away at each one, trying to get at the best way to teach service learning. So the first example, we had multiple clients and multiple projects. I was teaching in a mentoring program, so as I was new to the university, I was paired with a mentor, and she guided me through our community partnerships so I could start building a relationship with our organizations. The second situation was multiple clients with one project. That was my first service learning course on my own. And then my most recent service learning course is focusing on one client with one project. So each of the projects incorporated team writing. We read Joanna Wolf's Working in Teams, her book with all the strategies, including things like writing a team charter, using Gantt charts, agendas, and other sorts of project management skills. The types of assignments that they worked on were grant proposals, nonprofit documents, social media plans, web content, and so on. My population were graduate students who are rarely studied, mostly because it was a sample population that I had access to, and we did the most service learning with them. But I also chose them because they are often new to the profession and didn't have particularly a background in technical writing. It's still pretty rare to have an undergraduate degree in technical writing, at least in my immediate regional area. So there are varying levels of familiarity with technical writing. So I had, as I mentioned before, I had 3 service learning classes. Each were 15 weeks long, and they were introductory technical communication and information design classes and a grant writing course. So for the first service learning example, we worked with multiple clients and had several different projects going on. I had 4 teams of around 4 to 5 students per team, and then 3 different clients. So 2 student teams worked on with one group that needed a lot of work, and then the other 2 teams worked with 2 other unique organizations. Team 1 and Team 2 had a really good time with their partner. Their partner actually provided something that I've never seen a service learning partner provide before. But this is a whole compendium of all of the things that they were hoping to have funded in their grants. They had done research on, so they wanted projector for education purposes. They had already done the cost run through of all the different projectors. So they had done a lot of the research that I think the students would have typically done on their own, but they were a magical partner to work with. The other 2 were not so much, and ended up reflecting what Matthews and Zimmer discuss as pulling teeth to get the information from the client. Team 3 they were not able to finish their original proposal. They ended up having to reduce their deliverables considerably. They simply did not have the research method skills, and they also exhibited several overruled requests where they were coming up with ideas that the client had not necessarily asked, but the students thought would be good to implement. Team number 4 was also unable to retrieve information. They had a somewhat paralyzed process where the client ended up disappearing halfway throughout the semester, which happens. But we had lacked the research method skills, and the interpersonal skills were lacking. We didn't build a good enough relationship with that organization. And this happens often in nonprofits because it's run by volunteers, so we have to be very cognizant of their time. So the rate of satisfaction compared, as you would expect, with the client in satisfaction. Client 1, both students and the client were very happy. Client 2, the client and the students were mildly satisfied. And then client 3 was very low because the students weren't able to complete their project in a way that they wanted. The second project worked not with a nonprofit organization, but with a corporation in Baltimore. So I narrowed down the variables so we're working with one client, and each student team was competing for the best product design for what the organization had in mind. They were working with Confluence software, which is I guess a knowledge management system that lets you design a template. So they were organizing or proposing the best template for their knowledge base entries. So here is where I introduced call recording using Zoom software, because I thought that the students could revisit the phone calls and catch the things that they had missed, and hear from other teams to see like what they had asked, to see if there were any like holes in their stories. So we would call the organization at one time, and then each team would speak with them for 15 minutes. So my results from this one: Team 1, the deliverable was almost perfect. They loved it. They wanted to adopt it immediately. They had a great relationship with the client, and they met all of their needs. Team 2, the client was also very satisfied, had minor revisions. They thought that it was a really good template as well. Team 3 and 4 had a few updates. They had a few unheard requests that were not met, so we had a few critical listening skills that had fallen through the cracks. And then Team 5 completely missed the target. We had checked in 3 times throughout the semester, so this is what really pushed me on this project, to figure out where are we going wrong and how can we back up before we get to the point of going off on our own and creating our own overruled requests. So similar to the last example, the client satisfaction corresponded to the deliverables pretty closely. The first 4 teams were pretty happy with the relationship with the clients. Team 5 exhibited a bit more frustration, and the client was, I think, a little bit too soft on the feedback that was given back to the students who had come up with their own project. So that fell in a bit to the need for affirmation aspect. And then last, we worked with the same partner again, but with a new class, and none of the students had worked with this partner before. So I was the only one who'd worked with this partner. So again, we're working with videology, and we're building on the template that was created in the previous class. Now we're starting to complete it with online help documentation. The students are starting to work with subject matter experts, figure out how to write these help documents, and then present them in a way that is going to make sense to their employees. So for this class, we had 3 teams focusing on one client and one project. So again, they were focusing on coming up with the best idea for this project. Again, I recorded the calls via Zoom, but this time I ended up filtering the calls every time that we would meet. And after we would have these client meetings the next week, I would pick a call that went really well and then a call that went not so well. So we would listen to them together in class and criticize, coming up with ideas of how did this team's communication go well, what were some of the questions that they asked, how did the client respond, or how did this organization, how come this team did not get the same information as the other, what are the things that they could have changed a little bit differently. So we focused very explicitly on debriefing and assessing those interpersonal skills. We incorporated the idea of what are some of the questions that were asked, what were some of the echo strategies, things like, I'm hearing you say this, or am I interpreting this correctly, so on. And in this area, all three teams were very happy with the interaction with the client, and so was the client. Team 1 and 2, the client was very satisfied. Team 3 had very minor revisions to fix their help document, but they had only missed, I think, one unheard request. So all of the teams were pretty happy with this interaction. So my third experience exhibited the most progress in gathering information from the silos. Research methods were improved, I think, because we spoke explicitly about a lot of these things and had brought in the idea of what are some good interview skills, what are some of these interpersonal skills that are going to be involved. Critical listening was another really important part where we had discussed what are some of the things that we were missing, or did we interpret this properly as we listened to the calls the second time. Third, debriefing. This was something that we did as a class, whereas in the second group, or as in the second service learning project, I had expected these students to debrief on their own within their own teams, and I'm not sure exactly if the students were doing that or not. So I think that, forcing us to do that together as a class was really helpful to talk through and make sure that we were all on the same page. And then last, focusing on process over product. I put a big emphasis on the intangible aspects of writing, so focusing on the earlier stages of what are some of the questions I will ask, what is my relationship like with this client, what are some of the other things that I can do before I start actually designing the document. So hopefully that helped students focus on the process over product. So the implications for silo access for working with students and gaining access to client information. Regarding service learning, I think the fewer variables introduced, the better. I think having more control over the project that the students were doing let us reflect on it more in a way that made sense, and that everyone was on the same page. In my grading scheme on the syllabus, I actually gave a grade for the process part of the writing versus just the end product, because I knew that students were still going to be focused on the grade aspect. So I figured, okay, let's work with this. Let's think like a designer. How can I follow through with all of this so it makes sense to everyone? Increasing explicitness regarding the importance of debriefing, critical listening, and information-seeking processes. I had students read the actual literature on the gaps that have been found in pedagogy. We identified strategies for echoing and verifying information, and then we also discussed the repercussions for misinterpretation. So what happens when we don't meet the client's needs? We could lose our jobs. So we talked about that in a little bit higher context than prior service learning projects. And I think that helped us connect the dots between the soft skills in the actual document production. So I think having the idea of focusing on technical communication, including the interpersonal, the soft skills, rather than just technical writing, which focuses on the document and the end result, we'll be really happy. We'll make things work well. Okay, and these are my selected references. I didn't include them throughout the presentation, but I'll be happy to show you where they fit into the background situation. And I think I'm ready. Thank you very much.
I don't even have to show those little tabs, cardboard tabs. Thank you very much, Sarah. And now